Yeah, let's start with getting our listeners a little bit in on the tame and wicked problem differentiation and what it is in your own words, because I'm pretty aware it's something that not everyone's necessarily familiar with. So tame and wicked problems, what are they? What's the difference?
Okay,
Please?
so the original work for this came out of a paper by Rittel and Weber in 1973, and they basically distinguish between two kinds of problems that face us. Tame problems are problems that we face all the time, and we basically know how to solve them. So they're problems that usually have some kind of standard operating procedure. They're kind of mechanical or technical problems. And we have learned across time how to fix them, and they don't cause us a huge amount of problems. They are sometimes complicated, but they're not complex. In other words, when you take them out of their context and fix them, put them back into the context, you haven't really changed the context. Whereas when you look at wicked problems, you have changed the context because they're kind of moving targets, as you would actually say. That's tame problems. Wicked problems are a different category altogether. Wicked problems we don't know how to solve. They're either novel, so we don't know what to do with them, or they're recalcitrant. So we've had them over and over again, and for some reason we just don't seem to be able to fix them. They're the kind of problems that sit outside our knowledge and usually require more than one of us to be able to fix them. So they're not open to technical expertise because they're quite often kind of political problems rather than technical problems, and they quite often require some kind of collaborative or collective effort to address them. And we may never be able to fix them. They might just be something which is going to be with us forever. So there's an argument, for example, that COVID-19 is one example of a wicked problem that we may never be able to solve. We may be able to manage it better, but we might just have to learn to live with it. So problems like COVID-19, possibly, unless we get some kind of antidote to it, and also problems like crime, or ill health, or bringing up a family, or those kinds of problems, which we very often try to avoid looking at. They're quite often long term. So if you're a political leader, for example, it's quite often not in your direct interest to address a wicked problem, because this may involve a huge amount of time and effort. There may be no particular answer, and it may require you to persuade followers or voters to do something they don't necessarily want to do. So, for example, there are elements in the pandemics where political leaders require their citizens to stay indoors and not to go out. That's never going to be a popular thing. And if you keep doing this, it becomes less popular across time. So wicked problems are quite often associated with telling people things they don't want to hear. And that, of course, makes them even more difficult, much more difficult than tame problems. But in the original work that I did, I added a third category, critical problems, which are the role of, as in my phrase there, in the role of the commander, where you have to be very decisive and take the action that is required now. But that's not in the original Rittel and Weber work. I just decided that there was a missing piece of the jigsaw. So taming wicked problems and critical problems too. One of the difficulties with them is that when you kind of draw them up, what you end up with is what appears to be a typology or a box which puts these problems in. But in reality, that's just a heuristic. That's just a teaching device. And we know that actually most problems don't come with a box marked tame, you know what to do with me, or wicked, you don't, and you need some advice. They come in a bit of a mess, and there are bits hanging out, and people disagree about which bit belongs to which category. So this is almost by definition a political problem from the very start. And we know that many people have a kind of default responses to all kinds of problems. You know, some people like managing their way out of a tame problem. They like the kind of the skill approach. And we know that when people are facing wicked problems, they very often tend to default to a managerial approach, to assume that the solution is actually a standard operating procedure or science will help us out. And they tend not to assume the opposite, that this requires a different kind of approach. And the same occurs with wicked problems. There are some people that like dealing with very complex issues that require collaborative effort, and they like dealing with that levels of ambiguity. But quite often, if you take that to an extreme, you end up not making any kind of decisions. So these are not necessarily better or worse approaches. They're just different ways of thinking about how you deal with different kinds of problems.